friend. When I was talking about what I should do for today's tutorial, Ingrid suggested that I do something with masking since we're doing a self-care challenge weekend, and I thought that was a brilliant idea. What I usually do is go to the internet and search around for inspiration. A lot of times I go to Stamp Nation, and this time I knew I wanted to use the Naturally Inspired collection, so I just went straight to Google and I did a search. I wanted to do masking and I wanted to use the Naturally Inspired collection. So I found a few things that inspired me, and I decided to use that as the inspiration for this card. So I have a card from Deepti and I have a card from Maureen, and that is where I'm getting the inspiration. So the hardest part of this card is going to be cutting out the mask. I am missing my cutter bee scissors, so I went rummaging through my kiddos' rooms, because usually I can find my scissors in and amongst their things, thieving little hands they have. And I couldn't find the cutter bee scissors, but I did find these. So these are good. They're very sharp. These are made by Fiskars. I have no idea where I got them, either Michaels or Joann Fabrics. And they're really sharp. The blades are short-ish. And one of the important things when cutting out something like this is to have a sharp tip and like kind of thinner blades. Like if you see a pair of scissors like this, the blades are too thick and it's going to be hard to get a good precise cut. So yeah, that's that. So it's going to take me a minute to cut this out. This is just copy paper. So I'm just going to cut out these little nooks and crannies. And like I said, this detailed, sharp, pointy edge of the scissors are going to help me get into the little nooks and crannies. And that will help me do a good job when I'm masking. So I'm just going to cut the rest of this out and I'll be right back. Alright, so my mask is all set, and basically when I was cutting this out, I was trying to cut away all of the white. I can see right here I have a little more white. You may even want to cut just inside your image, because when you're stamping down on a mask, you want to push down pretty hard. If you don't, there's a little bit of height difference, even though it's so minimal. When you're masking, you want to make sure you're pressing down really hard, and you want to get the white out of there, because if you don't, you're going to end up with gaps. I don't know. We'll see if I end up with any gaps, but I will show you how to fix those too. So I'm using Simply the Best stamp set and Birds of a Feather. If you missed the Naturally Inspired collection back this summer, these will be available in our store second Tuesday of November. So with our next ink launch. Maureen's card used masking, and it used a red, orange, yellow color palette, and Deepti's used a blue. She did all of her feathers blue, and the way she stamped them, I was super intrigued by it. Now before I go any further, I should have done this a minute ago. I'm going to take two-way glue pen. This is by Tombow, and I'm just going to add a little bit of glue to the back of this feather. I'm going to let it dry, and then it will become a temporary adhesive. So when I lay it on top of my whatever feather I'm stamping, then it won't move around and it'll stick. Okay, so the glue pen that I was using is pretty well dried up, so I really didn't get too much of that glue on here, so we'll see how I fare. So I'm going to start out, I'm going to stamp a Fiesta Blue feather, and what Deepti did, she inked it, and then she sprayed it with water, and then she stamped. I'm using watercolor cardstock. The reason I'm not going to do it that way is because if I put the water on my stamp and stamped it down, now my cardstock is going to be wet, and then when I add my mask on top, my mask is going to get wet. And I don't want my mask to get wet because I want to reuse it over and over, and I don't want to fussy cut that out again. So I'm just going to go to my next ink color, and I'm not even going to wash that off. I'm just going to stamp it down. Oh, and Maureen's, she did every other. She did right side up and then upside down. And one thing you may be noticing is that I'm not getting a full coverage there, and that is because this is watercolor cardstock. It's bumpy. So if you're stamping on watercolor cardstock and you want a really good solid image, you might want to break out your MISTI to use that, and then you can stamp it a couple times if you need to. All right, now I'm going to go to Lime Ricky. We'll stamp this that way. And we'll just move the mask. Next up, I was going to use Garden Party, but I just changed my mind. I'm going to pull in Melon Ice. And we'll turn that upside down. And then I'm going to go back to the Fiesta Blue. So next up is Aquatini. And Lime Ricky and Melon Ice. And as I pull the masks off, you can see how the feathers look like they're layered one behind another, and it's just such a cool effect. So right here you can see a white line. This is what I was talking to you about, where you might get some gaps between your mask and your stamping. You can grab something like a little Fantastic or a little blender pen or an aqua brush, and you can kind of just paint in. That looks a little funny right now, so I'm actually glad I'm doing this watercolor technique, because I'd have to figure something else out, maybe a sequin right there. So to get the watercolor look that Deepti did, I'm just going to take my distress sprayer and I'm going to add a bunch of water in my hand, and I'm just going to spritz it on and drop it onto all of my feathers. So I'm just going to let that sit for a couple minutes. It's a water-based ink, so it's going to react, and then if you want to, you can take a paper towel and you can just dab it, and you can see that lifts color. And you can do a little bit or you can do a lot. That may not be enough for you. Let me do some more. You can get big drops or you can get small drops. So there is the result. I think that is such a cool look. So I have all the stamping done. I did all of my little water messing around and I'm ready for the greeting now. So I'm going to use this vest. I'm basically going to do a really similar thing to what Maureen did. So I'm going to use my Midnight ink pad, and I'm going to stamp it a couple times because, like I told you guys before, this is watercolor paper and sometimes it's hard to get into the nooks and crannies and get it all stamped solid. So I want to use this as an embossing ink, so I'm just really quickly, after I stamp, putting on my embossing powder. I am using the Wanderlust embossing powder. This was in the Naturally Inspired collection. It will also be in our store very soon, so check it out. Let's see. I have some stray glitter kind of in different places. That may be for a couple of reasons. It may be that there was some still. I can speak correct English. There may have been some dampness still to my cardstock. I'm not sure. I didn't have a powder tool on hand. If I had a powder tool on hand, I would have just wiped it down to make sure. But because it's Wanderlust, I didn't worry quite as much about embossing powder getting in places that I didn't want it, because it's just sparkly, so it's going to look fine. So I'll just heat this. You'll see it takes a minute to heat up and turn to liquid and get shiny and glittery and awesome. Now you can see up close what that looks like. It is a really great embossed best, black, glittery. You can also do Versamark with like black glint wow embossing powder. The only drawback to doing it that way is if you get specks in places you don't want it, then it's black and you can't really hide it or cover it up, and I don't think you want that. But either way, you're going to get a black sparkly look. So another thing Maureen did was she stamped a bunch of these guys around on the top of her feathers. These are little birds, and they were created to stamp into the little nooks right in here and then kind of go from small to bigger. So like the feather is turning into a flock of birds, but some of them look like little hearts. So that's kind of fun to stamp them as hearts. So I'm going to stamp a few of those and just kind of place them around in various places. I'm going to do all of the colors that I did the feathers in. I'll do a couple of these bigger ones. Add a sentiment around the best. I love the laughter is the best medicine sentiment. So just stamp that using the Misty to make sure it's lined up. So in hindsight, that doesn't show up quite as well as maybe I wanted it to. I'm going to go ahead and leave it, but if I were to remake this card, I would do something different with the sentiment. Now to finish this off, Maureen had a glittery black strip on the bottom. I'm going to do mine all around the edge, kind of along the idea of Deepti's card, because her card front, the stamped part was as big as a card front. So she didn't have any layering going on, and I really liked that look. So I think this is a really great way to incorporate both those ideas, having the black glittery layer behind, but also, you know, not having a white layer behind all my layers, if that makes sense. So I'm just covering it with Versamark, and then I'm going to do the Wanderlust embossing powder. I'll heat it, and then I will have some black glittery cardstock to layer behind. I guess I forgot to do that, but I will go ahead and heat this. Just gonna take a minute. I'm being careful to try to not point this down at my work surface, so I don't blow all that embossing powder around. So you can see once that gets going, it really moves. It changes that powder to kind of a liquidish, and then it will cool off and settle down and be a really great black glittery layer behind. Really cool accent. So here is my glitter layer. I'm going to add some adhesive on the back. I already added 3M mounting tape to my layer. I actually added quite a bit because I added water to that layer, so it got a little warpy and I want it to lay flat. So usually I would just adhere it straight to this black layer, but because it has so much glitter, it's going to be a little difficult to get it to stick really well. And some of the design team have been sending us some samples in the mail, and I'm noticing how much dimensional adhesive they use. And when you actually have the card in your hand and you're looking at it and you see all this dimension, it just takes your card up another notch and it really looks terrific. I am really loving this glitter paper. There is a lot of yellow in that Wanderlust, and I think it looks so cool with the melon ice and the lime Ricky. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's tutorial and you have had fun seeing how I can take elements from 2 different cards and put it into one and come out with a super fun card. Also incorporating masking, and as a little head nod to our self-care challenge weekend. So hope you guys take some time for yourself this weekend as usual. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you soon.